Today we have a 1995 Ram 2500 turbo diesel. This vehicle is an old farm truck and it has a slow crank issue. It's cranking so slow it won't even start up. The batteries are checking out okay, so the starter is pulling too many amps. So I'm going to show you how to remove and replace the starter on this vehicle. The very first thing that you want to do before attempting to remove the starter is to disconnect the batteries. This vehicle has two batteries, one on the driver's side and one on the passenger side. And I always disconnect the negative battery cable from each battery, and that will break the system so there's no power going to anywhere on the vehicle where you can short anything out as you're taking some of the wires loose. And the reason I disconnect the negative cable is if I accidentally touch any metal on this vehicle with a wrench while I'm taking the negative cable loose, I'm not going to spark or an arc. If you disconnect the positive cable first before disconnecting the negative, you can stand a chance of touching something metal and it'll immediately start welding whatever it is you have in your hand to the frame of the vehicle or the fender or anything else that it comes into contact. After disconnecting the batteries, take a floor jack or a bottle jack and raise the vehicle up and make sure that you put a jack stand that is adequate enough to hold the vehicle in place so that the jack is not actually supporting the vehicle. Right now the jack stand is the only thing that's supporting the vehicle on this truck. Now we're going to crawl under and I'm going to show you the mounting bolts and where the wires hook up on the starter. This is the starter. It's mounted on the driver's side at the rear of the engine. The first wire you need to take off, this is your main battery wire, and it has a 17mm bolt head on it, so use a 17mm wrench to take this wire loose from the starter. Then use an 8mm wrench to remove this nut from this wire. This is your solenoid wire. Remove both of these wires from the starter and push them back out of the way, and then we'll work on the mounting bolts. I removed the bolts from the starter, or the nuts and the wires. The solenoid wire broke because the stud came loose inside the solenoid, and I broke off the little ring on the end of the wire, so I'll have to repair that before I replace the wire back on the new starter. The bolts that mount the starter, there's three of them. One of them is way in the back. Can't hardly get my finger in there. Right here at the bottom, and one right here, and then there's one on the top just straight up above this one. And these nuts are a 12-point head, so you can't use a 6-point socket. Use a 10mm 12-point socket to remove these bolts. And I would highly recommend removing the top bolt first, because if you remove the bottom ones and then you're trying to get the top one out, the starter will start to angle down and it'll put pressure on it and just make it harder to get out. So I would recommend removing the top bolt first and then taking either a wrench or a 12-point socket, 10mm, to remove these bolts and then slide the starter out of the bell housing. Here's the starter after it is removed from the vehicle, and after removing it I noticed there are several issues with this starter. One of them being the little cover at the solenoid here is loose, and the wire is loose right here, and the main cranking problem is inside this part. So we're going to go and purchase a new or reman starter and stick it back on the vehicle. Okay, so now we have the new starter in the vehicle. The wire was repaired with a little ring connector, Everything is connected back up to the starter, so now it's time to crawl back out from under this thing and hook the battery cables back up and see if we got some improvement on our cranking. After putting the starter in and getting it all bolted up, I reached in there and the engine cranked right up, running like it's supposed to. Thanks for watching.